Hello. My name is Yu Xie, Professor of Sociology, Statistics, and Public Policy at University of Michigan. Today, I have the honor of introducing our speaker today. Before I introduce our speaker, let me make a few announcements. Please note that next week, we will have no presentation at CCS Brown Bag because it will be our winter break or spring break, depending on your point of view. But to me, it's winter break. But the week after that, March 12th, we will have Sarah Schneewit, Associate Professor of History at UC San Diego, who will be speaking on Father and Mother of the People, thinking through mean bureaucratic paternalism. I would also appreciate if you could turn off your cell phone. I even didn't bring my cell phone to this talk, mainly because we have a quite distinguished visitor and speaker, Victor Ni. I'm not going to read off the note. I've known Victor for more than 20 years by now. He is an important scholar, actually one of the most important scholars in sociology who study China. I've learned a lot from him, got along with him, and have had debates with him. In fact, one of the characteristics of Victor is that not only he likes to debate, he actually creates controversy. And nothing he does is trivial. Nothing he does is less than controversial. And today he's going to present his latest work from a thick book, Capitalism from Below, co-authored with Sonia Alper. It details the theory and evidence in explaining the emergence of economic institution of capitalism in China. Today, he will be speaking on capitalism from below. Please, Victor.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here to speak to a Michigan audience, and thank you for the generous introduction you share. It is true we really enjoy dialogue, and especially a long-standing debate, which is the fun of being a scholar, that you can have a fun time disagreeing and then trying to come to some clarity about how the world works through empirical evidence. Today, I'm going to give a progress report for an ongoing study of the rise of a new economic order in China. And this study is based in the Yangzi Delta region. And the first progress report was a book, Capitalism from Below, which was published about 6 months ago. And so I will give you an analytic narrative from this study because it's a thick book and I don't assume that you've read it. And then I will give you a peek preview of some of the more detailed one of the more case studies where we do a more detailed account of the social mechanisms that are driving the emergence of very much independent private enterprise economy. In other words, capitalist economic development. And so the problem which we are addressing in this ongoing study is the structural transformation of the Chinese economy, an economy which in 1978, at the start of reform, was 99.5% state-owned in the commercial industrial sector. And by 2009, the wholly state-owned enterprise declines to about 20% of gross industrial output, which is a very sharp decline. About 41% of the industrial economy now is accounted for by the production of private companies. 25% are limited liability companies of mixed ownership, and 13% shareholding corporations of mixed ownership. And I think, to be generous, these are largely large enterprises listed on the Shanghai Shenzhen Stock Exchange, where the government still owns a part of the action. And we will assume that this part broadly should be included in what remains of the state-owned economy, although it's become more privatized. So that's about 45% of industrial production. Coming from nowhere, literally nowhere, was the rise of a significant private manufacturing economy. This is not the mom and pop trading company or the small little restaurants or booths or ice cream parlor, but these are manufacturing firms, and they play an important role in the shift and emergence of China as a major manufacturing economy. And the private manufacturing companies now account for 40% of industrial profits and employs about 47% of industrial workforce. Now, this is quite a remarkable phenomenon since the start of economic reform in 1978. This is a relatively short period of time, and the aim of the reform was more a restoration, attempt to revitalize a stagnant state-owned economy that had been shattered by decades of political turmoil, and which was technically and economically stagnant. And if there were any ideas of capitalism, which still the government professes is not there, it would have been a red capitalism. Large state-owned enterprises that had corporatized, invited some private ownership, and listed on the Shanghai Shenzhen Stock Exchange. So the rise of an independent private manufacturing economy was really not anticipated, nor planned, nor wanted by the political elite. It happened as an unintended consequence of reform. So the puzzle really is, and this involves a friendly debate with an old friend of mine, Doug North, about the role of the state, because Doug is known for his argument that it's the state that is the primary source of economic performance. And it's a very elegant and powerful argument, and one which won him the Nobel Prize in Economics, justifiably so. And that the state is the central arbiter of institutional change because the state doesn't have a free rider problem. The state has a monopoly of legitimate violence and coercive force in the territory, and it's very powerful, and it doesn't face the same free rider problems that private actors confront in promoting institutional change that brings about public goods. So the question really is, and this is the puzzle, how does one explain the rise of a private manufacturing economy that has grown to such scale and still remains a robust sector of the economy? Because state-centered theory, by definition, focuses on the state and on political actors and their role, and an important role, in bringing about institutional change that guides economic performance. And there's no issue about this. The state plays a key role in China. It launched economic reform in 1978 and has continued to guide that reform. But what is overlooked in state-centered theory is the important role of economic actors and the bottom-up origin of institutional innovations that give rise to new economic institutions. And that this plays a key role in the emergence of capitalist economic development in China, and it also played a key role in the emergence of capitalism in the West, which is argued by Joe Mercure at Northwestern, but earlier by Max Weber, who pointed to the bottom-up origins of capitalist institutions in the West. Now, there's good theory behind this, and one of the distinguished political scientists at Michigan, Robert Axel, has made in his studies of the emergence of norms, points out that norms only become formalized once a norm becomes firmer. In other words, the origin of behavior governed by rules oftentimes emerges from informal norms. And when there's wide consensus that this rule is fair, then there will be push to formalize it in the way of a state-mandated and enforced rule. So much of commercial law, especially in the common law tradition, generally follows this pattern of emergence. First, a practice, a business practice, an expectation, a norm, widely practiced, and then eventually becomes codified as part of the commercial law. And so what we wanted to do was to explain the emergence of economic institutions of capitalism, not from the state responded, but from bottom up through institutional innovations of entrepreneurs who are acting on their own, but together in networks, in close-knit communities. Now, this gives a schematic model of the dynamics that we are tracing empirically and studying in the book. This is a Schelling type model. The vertical axis is utilities that comes from compliance to informal norms or to the formal rules of the game. So the C line would be payoff to compliance to a rule mandated by government, enforced by government. And the D line would be an informal norm, say in this case, pursuing private profit during the Cultural Revolution. It never emerges as a dominant strategy because the state is very, very alert to suppressing any shoots of capitalism. And so you can see this line, the horizontal axis is over time and a number of economic actors, that it never becomes a dominant strategy to make income on the side, whether it was from a private plot or a small business, because it was always more rewarding to observe the rules backed by the state against private enterprise and capitalism. And what we see here is a different type of scenario where you have inefficient, basically a stateless society, a failed state. And it's never in this setting rewarding to follow the rules because they're not enforced by the state. Instead, you follow the informal norms that are widely accepted in the business community in a state that is failed. Here's what is interesting and where we began to give a narrative about the emergence, bottom-up, of economic institutions that provide the key support that enables and motivates and guides entrepreneurial activity that is not organized by the state. And the key here is a tipping point where as more and more people move into and start up private manufacturing firms, and in a way it was illegal to do so because any manufacturing firm that employed more than 7 employees was in a way was breaking the law, and they could be expropriated or penalized in a serious way that would discourage this type of activity. But as more entrepreneurs found that this was indeed profitable, that they were generating private wealth, employing workers, and as more moved into private manufacturing, there's a tipping point at X where you see the transition that it becomes more rewarding to pursue decouple from the state system and pursue private manufacturing than to stay with the state manufacturing system, assuming that you are not a core firm. And this is, again, when you begin to have the privatization of state-owned firms and the control ownership shifting to private ownership. As more and more people come in, the risk declines, the payoff increases, it becomes a self-reinforcing dynamic with a social movement like quality to it. People coming in because they see others doing so and succeeding tremendously at entrepreneurship. Let me just move on to the sample. So this is the Yangzi Delta region. And what we did there was to sample 700 firms and their entrepreneurs. They all had to be CEOs of the firms that they started or acquired through privatization in 7 of the cities in the Yangzi Delta. And in a representative set of industries. So these were textiles, medical and pharmaceutical product firms, ordinary machinery, factories, vehicle and auto parts, and communication equipment. So there's a range of industrial production. Generally, this is what is the comparative advantage of this region. And what we used was a mixed or multi-method approach where we, again, sampled actually 711 entrepreneurs. We conducted 2 waves of this large-scale survey, 2006, 2009, with a firm that originally was the survey research organization for the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. And then they had so much fun going around with us, studying private firms that they privatized. And now it's a private, for-profit survey research firm. And we just completed the 3rd wave, 2012, of the same sample. About 77% of the original sample chose to participate in the 2012 survey. And sometime next month, I'll begin starting to analyze that data set with my co-author, Sonia Opper. But the mixed method was that we interviewed 130 individuals. About 100 of them were entrepreneurs. The last question of each of the surveys, we asked them, do you want to meet with the principal investigators face-to-face? And surprisingly, 70% or thereabouts said yes, they would like to meet with us. And so we were able to meet with them in their factory in about an hour and a half of interview to get a sense of the meaning of their behavior that we were picking up in the surveys, how they thought about what they were doing. And also, as a part of the study, we did incentivize field experiments, working with a Swedish field experimental economist in the 2009. In the 2012 survey, we have more technical network measures, and here Ronald Bird at University of Chicago has joined the research group. So what are the mechanisms that are driving this self-reinforcing dynamic? Well, clearly, with the emergence of markets, you have competition based in markets that provides incentives for entrepreneurs to come up with bottom-up institutional innovations to break through the bottlenecks, the barriers of entry that were put up by government for private manufacturing firms. That with entrepreneurial action and the self-reinforcing process and growth of it, through trial and error, you have the successful solutions to problems diffused through this region. And then through mutual monitoring and enforcement of informal norms and cross-cutting multiplex networks, you have the rise of informal business norms, ways to conduct business that are fair and widely accepted and with community sanctions for people who violate the expectations. And then mimicking, a very important mechanism of people looking at others who are successful and saying, if he can do it, I can too. And this is then a basis of the diffusion of interest in starting up a private enterprise and decoupling from the mainstream state-controlled economy. So here's one of the entrepreneurs we interviewed. He started a high-tech automated packaging firm, and is quite successful. But you can see, as many of these people, they're self-made individuals. entrepreneurs in the classic Schumpeterian tradition of enterprise and innovation. He developed his own technology and has his factory is like a research institute. They innovate. He has many patents every year, and now he's competing not only as the dominant manufacturer of automated packaging equipment, but he's now being sought after in the global economy for the excellence of his product. And so the way it works is that if someone can do it, I can too. This type of mimicking activity, which leads and the rapid accumulation of wealth. Wealth accumulated very rapidly in this private sector, as it does in the rise of capitalism in the West. Great wealth is usually accumulated in a short period of time, right after the Civil War in the United States, during the height of the information revolution in the late 20th century. And the same with China. Now they have a very rapidly growing population of billionaires, and many of them come from this private enterprise economy. So it is an aspect of demonstration effect. And just aside, I'm now doing research as a sequel to this study in an entirely different institutional environment in New York City of the rapidly emerging high-tech economy in New York City. And we are discovering that some of the very same mechanisms are at play there as well, the aspect of mimicking and demonstration effects. So the key to the evolution of the private enterprise economy takes place within industrial clusters. These are aggregations, dense centers of industrial production. And there in the networks of business networks, you have the key processes taking place that allows for a comparative advantage of these industrial clusters, scattered all over Zhejiang and Jiangsu and in the outskirts of Shanghai, that people learn from each other, mutual learning. They help each other. There's exchange of ideas and information. There's cooperation and pooling of resources, because in these industrial clusters, it's very clear that while they are competitive, the real competition is outside of that cluster, in the domestic market, in the global marketplace. And then there's mutual mimicking of each other. The ways of success, the ways to failure, leads to and understanding what are the norms and informal rules of the game. So that's very much the account that how an largely independent private manufacturing economy emerged from the bottom up, that it didn't rely on state mandated rules. In fact, those rules tried to check the development and still do, and discriminate against the private enterprise firm. And what is striking about this private enterprise sector is high degree of structural autonomy. And here we see a key part of the production market, this upstream suppliers. And we can see here, these are the privatized firms here. That is, originally they were owned by government and they privatized. They still rely on government-owned firms for their suppliers, more so than the firms that began as private firms, especially the firms in Ningbo, Wenzhou, Hangzhou, that the manufacturers in the private sector rely on a network of private suppliers. They rely on a network of private distributors, and they don't like to be dependent on the state-owned sector because they see the problems there, and they count on greater efficiency upstream and downstream with other firms that are like them, private enterprise. And so there's a great deal of structural autonomy, so that the government really isn't in a position to control the private economy because there's no point of control since much of the action takes place under the radar of the state. And the government is certainly there to regulate and to ensure compliance with, say, labor law, with making sure that firms pay taxes and so forth. But much of the private enterprise economy has a type of structural autonomy. And the importance of social network is very clear in this economy. We had many questions that asked questions that network scholars help us design to get at the tangible ways in which interpersonal relations, usually with non-kin, but local people, were used in economic activity. And here we asked the question, tell us what the 5 most important business contacts do in your business. And so the statistical mean is what we described below, and you can see that they are getting all the key inputs, purchase of material inputs, reciprocal lending. Private enterprises are not able to secure capital from state-owned banks. That is generally for the state-owned enterprises. So with capitalism, you need capital. And so they have devised an alternative way to secure capital. And this is their reciprocal lending among the private manufacturers. It's a very common way. So this would involve taking a short-term loan and paying back to someone who is also a manufacturer or a supplier or a distributor. And then you have technology. These are firms that are innovating and to compete in this economy. So firms count on, as one of their top closest contacts, personal ties, people to help them with technology development. Sales and marketing, talking about new market trends, pricing, talking about new government regulations, say new minimum wage laws and what it means to their industry, and securing new customers. So all of these key activity crucial to the success and survival of a firm seem to be taking place through long-term repeat transactions in networks of businessmen. And generally, these are not relatives so much as people that have accumulated good reputation and who are trustworthy in the business community. And so the question really is, and this has been a long-standing debate, again, that people like economists are involved in, and also economic sociologists, who I am, is that how is it that informal norms, rules that are not enforced by government or by a government-like organization, but rules that are socially enforced, how do they provide the sinews of a business community to run to be able to conduct long-term contracts through a network of people that you know, with contracts that are written, but which relies on informal norms to meet the expectation to resolve the principal agent problem. And so this turns a lot and we discovered in the research, not simply on the immediate network, but on something larger, that is community sanctions. That in community sanctions, you may not know the people who do the sanctioning, and you may not know about them, but they're involved in enforcing the rules of the game, the informal norms, in a way that allows for enough confidence that deals will be completed, that principal agents will not cheat, or that opportunism will be checked to some extent. There will always be broken deals, cheaters, but these people then become known, and that there are consequences in terms of reputational effects. And so you can see these are quotes from our interviews. Whoever dares to do something bad, everyone will know about it. Everyone will stop giving credit, and there will be no hope of making it in this business. So there's quite strong consequences. And economists like Avner Greif studies this, and that there are consequences that are meted through informal sanctions that are very effective. In New York City, I asked the same question. It turns out, well, the consequence is that someone will write a blog about you, and it goes on Twitter, and everybody knows about it. Or someone might write an article that exposes unethical behavior. Not often, but enough that it keeps people sharp. Another quote: reputation is like a code of conduct. Good reputation is needed if you want to help from others. If you have good reputation, people will help you if you have problems. So there is a reputational capital. It pays to have a good reputation. It can ruin you if you get a bad reputation. So how does this work? Because norm enforcements rest on information exchange between actors, so that the actor's reputation is known to their audiences. This involves information passing word of mouth. And gathering reputational information for the actor, the principal, is often difficult to get because it's costly to ask someone, what do you really think about me? Or to get that range of opinion from the audiences that you're doing business with. And so we're picking at a forthcoming paper just to show the type of zeroing in we can do with this data set to understand better the fine-grained aspects of how this economy works. And another aspect of reputation is that your reputation doesn't belong to you. It's in the mind of others. So I have no idea I have some idea of what my reputation is, but I don't own it. It's in the audience that know about what I do and read my work, and I hear I have a reputation for being controversial. So well, that's the reputation. It's owned by Yushe, not by me. So the question, of course, it makes reputation hard to study because you can't. It is out there, and the person whose reputation it is not something they own. And so here we have tried to draw on the excellent work by people like Ernst Fehr and others, and Michael Novak at Harvard on reputation. And so this is a model of reputation that you have, say, entrepreneur A, who helps entrepreneur B start up a firm, an aspiring entrepreneur, and A does not. A does this help and kind deed. It doesn't get a direct reciprocity from B for this. But the point is that word of this gets out through gossip and talk. People hear that A had done a very generous act to help B, which was not directly profitable to A. And so it's out here, and the point is that A generally has an idea of his or her reputation as a reflexive process. I think I have a bad reputation. I sense it. Or I think this has a good reputation effect, so I'll do it more often. And so it is a reflexive process by which an actor reclaims the reputation that is owned by others. And now, Yushe mentioned I'm controversial, so I'll be careful not to make any controversial comments to reinforce that claim. So that's a reflexive process. Now, the question is, how does one measure reflexive reputation? Well, one way is that we interview people. And so here is someone, once your reputation is lost, you can no longer do business. Reputation is like a code of conduct. Others will help you if you have a good reputation. So what we did was to resort to a way to measure reflexive reputation by looking at the measures we had to measure norms, so that self-assessed pro-social behavior towards others is whether people provide business advice, whether they help others with informal loans. This is key in a system economic order where you can't get loans from the banks because the banks are state-owned. So startup capital and investment capital comes through relationships. Helping out with technology. Many of these firms don't have standalone research and development, and yet they know innovation is key. So much of the innovation takes place through networks, much like the innovation biotechnology industry in the United States, because no firm has all of the expertise to innovate a new product. This is true in the Yangzi Delta, introducing customers, informing others about cheaters. So this is pro-social behavior that we measured through the 2009 survey. And so we see that this is, we have a scale, and I won't go into the details of this because I recognize that my time is limited, but just to give you a flavor of the subsequent new work we're doing, which will be further along in the way of research reports. And so the question is, how does one measure norms? Again, you can't really ask people directly about it, but there's an indirect way that we figured out how to do this based on reading and thinking about Robert Ellickson's book, Order Without Law. And so we gave people scenarios. So it's not about them directly, but hypothetical cases. If a supplier is late, so late in delivering this promised supply, imagine Apple concerned about their supplier. If they're late, this has a huge effect on Apple's bottom line, and as it does to any firm. And that in this scenario, we assume that the person's so late that it causes a loss to the principal, and that the supplier who was late in delivering the supply that was promised doesn't compensate. So what happens? Now, it's clear if nothing happens, you don't have a norm, because it's maybe an expectation, but there's nothing behind it, no sanctions. Now, and then subsequently, you have higher levels of enforcement, beginning with someone would do negative gossip, talk about this with their friends or business associates about their experience, and that has a reputational effect. And then another sanction is that there will be financial compensation. Another higher level of sanction is that the person will stop doing business, or there'll be a material consequence in the bilateral business relations. But this is the one that is really interesting. Community sanctions by people you don't necessarily know, who hear about it and say, all right, there's going to be a price to be paid for this conduct of malfeasance or opportunism. Maybe the supplier sold to someone else, and that's why they were late in making the commitments. So this is the kind of thing that you want to, that allows us to study, to confirm, yes, these are business norms, that there is a consequence for not delivering on a commitment that causes a material loss to someone who you promised to do this to. And here we can see measures of the consequences. And here we have expectations on the part of the actor of community sanctions. And you can see that there isn't much in the way of sanction for a dispute about whether you will enter into business relationship with someone, because you haven't entered into that relationship yet, and there's a disagreement before the start of that relationship. But here you have conflict over and dispute over contract enforcement. You have a principal-agent relationship, and there's a conflict over enforcement of that conflict. And under those conditions, negative gossip gets out there, and there is a higher likelihood of community sanctions. And community sanctions should be thought of as a public good, that people will take seriously the norms of business, and when they hear someone has cheated or deliberately had not met the commitment, that has a consequence, not meted by yourself in a bilateral relationship, but by others. I won't go into the regressions for that, but I want to summarize the results that the regressions led us to conclude that we did find results that were consistent with the idea that reputation is a reflexive process by which people, agents, self-assess how they should behave to meet the expectations of others, and whether and how to contribute to the public good on the basis of what they expect will be the reputational effect from the community. That in business networks, reputable behavior is often assumed in principal-agent relationship. People assume that the people they do business with will be honest and reputable. And I discovered this is the same in New York City. Surprisingly, these are general mechanisms of business, and that are not just peculiar to China, even though they have a very different institutional environment and civilization. And that those known for their reputable behavior can expect to benefit from community enforcement of norms. That people who are outstanding in their reputable and in their behavior can expect that the community will back them. This was, I think, a significant finding, and what explains for why we do see pro-social behavior more widely distributed than what you would expect from a narrow tit-for-tat type of game. That people do perform in a pro-social way without the immediate tit-for-tat, direct enforcement from the principal who's been cheated, but through this behavior that they are very concerned about maintaining their reputation, and they reflexively figure out what is needed to maintain a good reputation in the business community. And they know that if they lose that has very dire consequences, that they can't expect people to cooperate with them, can't expect people to want to do business with them, and that this has a long, long shadow. So that's an account of what's new in the pipeline from the studies that we will do in the future. So, but to sum up the analytic narrative, the main story here is that bottom-up institutional innovations secure gains from cooperation that enable the private enterprise economy to emerge, even though they face formidable barriers from government. That there are a series of tipping points where a self-reinforcing growth of population of entrepreneurs began to outnumber the capability of government to enforce rules against private enterprise. There's just too many of them, and moreover, they're making money. And they're making money in a way that government now has a new source of revenue. So it is in the interest of government to accommodate what's taken place as change in the real economy. And moreover, entrepreneurs become savvy, and they begin to lobby government for change, and are admitted into the Communist Party and become active in promoting and pushing for change that would be in the interest of private enterprise. Now, this is a figure that I found when we put together very important to demonstrate the stability of capitalist economic institutions and capitalist economic development. In this first figure, this is 1992 here on the percent of private share of private employment in different towns that we studied. And this is the per capita fiscal revenue in 1978. So what we see is that it's the poorer communities that move most quickly to private enterprise. Wenzhou, facing Taiwan, was not able to get state investments in state-owned enterprises. They were extraordinarily poor. And so the only game in town were the private manufacturers. And of course, the government quickly realized that and came to support it. Shanghai, the center of heavy industry in China, was the last to come on board because the state-owned enterprises were strong, and government, more than anything else, until very late in the game, didn't encourage or rather discourage private enterprise. But the most interesting over time data, I think, is this one on the far right. This is the percent of state-owned enterprise for 31 provinces in 1978. And you can see the rest here are local collective-owned township and village enterprises. But you can see over time, the private state-owned enterprise as a percent of industrial production declines. And this is a very nice line, linear line almost, with different spikes on it. This is a line of per capita income tax collected by government. It's in the inverse relationship. The lower the percentage in your province of state-owned enterprises, the higher the revenue from income tax collected by government. This income tax is from the tax revenue then is really from the private sector and private employment, much more so than from the state sector. So that is a strong correlation. In a way of summary, what we see in the first report is very strong evidence as we look at each of the key economic institutions, the labor market, financial market, that is capital markets, markets for innovation, markets for markets for lending, all the different key markets of capitalism. We see that the economic institutions were innovated and emerged from bottom up. That the economic institutions were centered on welfare maximizing norms that enabled entrepreneurs, like-minded entrepreneurs in networks to capture wealth. And so this was an endogenous process. And that the causal priority in the emergence of capitalism was first this bottom-up emergence, and the government then comes in after the change had already taken place in the real economy. So it was 2004, 2 decades after this, the emergence of dynamic private enterprise manufacturing economy, that the government provided legal rights, constitutional rights to the private enterprise. And in 2007, they provided property rights. And so the legal reform occurred and followed the emergence of this new economic order and the economic institutions that evolved from bottom up to legitimate it once it had already been in place. And it was clear that you couldn't reverse the clock, and that this was a sector that generated wealth, generated economic growth, became then defined as essential to the health of the Chinese economy because so many people found employment in it, so much wealth was being produced, and local economic development became contingent increasingly on the health of the private enterprise economy and whether or not a local region was able to attract talented entrepreneurs to that region, to keep them there, and to help them. They began thinking about helping private enterprise to develop and grow in their region because it was such an important source of revenue and economic development. So that's the story that I'm summarizing, that we have much more detailed account of in this book, and which is the first progress report. I'm pleased to have questions.